USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to the USCHO Weekend Review podcast for Sunday, January 6, 2019. This episode is brought to you by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo. NCAA.com/Frozen4. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. And man, this has been just a crazy weekend for college hockey.
It really has. I mean, from upsets to kind of crazy sweeps to crazy endings, crazy locations for games, playing outdoors. I mean, there's just so much that we could talk about. And obviously the World Juniors is another thing that's on our mind. So might as well get going because we have a lot to cover.
Well, it was a disaster for the teams at the top of the polls. Just about everybody lost either this weekend or going back to last weekend. Number one, St. Cloud goes down to Union on Friday night in the Three Rivers Classic, but then Union gets thumped by Brown the next night. So down goes number one. And then on Friday night also, UMass falling 2-1 at the hands of UMass Lowell, an in-state rival, just to get us rolling.
Yeah, it just starts there. Obviously, Minnesota State had kind of a lost weekend out at the Desert Classic a week before. Minnesota Duluth, the only team that really didn't play a regulation game. They played against the under-18 game and a team, U.S. under-18 team in an exhibition game. They actually lost that game, but it won't count against their record. Quinnipiac, they suffer a loss at the hand of Colgate and then tie Cornell. Notre Dame, they lose to Michigan Outdoors. Ohio State, they end up the first team that we're going to get to that hasn't had a loss of late, but they did blow a 7-4 lead on Friday night in the final 5 minutes against Michigan State. Denver, now they're the team. They're the one team we can talk about that was blemish-free this weekend with a 2-game sweep of Wisconsin. But it really was just a crazy weekend for the top of the poll. I mean, you can expect to see one or two teams maybe falter, but this is going to be a very tough ballot to put together on Monday morning for a lot of people. You know, I haven't even kind of looked at mine. I'm kind of leaning still toward probably going with UMass. Because, you know, when you look at the pairwise, they're the number one team in the pairwise after all of this is said and done. But there was a lot of shakeup in the pairwise as well this weekend. So it really was one of those crazy weekends that you don't believe will ever kind of all come together in the same weekend. But it certainly did this week.
I was talking to a couple of colleagues in the press box after Saturday night's game, and they're like, this poll may look a lot like an early season poll. Usually you've got teams separating themselves, but I would not be surprised to see a half a dozen teams getting first place votes this Monday.
It's hard to get a feel for who the number one team in the country is right now, just because of the fact that nobody has been perfectly consistent coming out of this break. There's been some rust on a lot of these teams as they come out of break. You hear coaches talk about that rust, but you've actually seen it this year where even some of the best teams and some teams that were just rolling going into the break come out of the break with a few stumbles.
Well, another one that really rocked the college hockey world this weekend was based on outstanding goaltender performances by two different goaltenders for Canisius as the Golden Griffins swept North Dakota. Blake Wyrick with a 1-goal performance on Friday night, and then Matt Ladd, who joined the team at the semester break from juniors, made 48 saves on Saturday night. For the weekend sweep at Harbor Center in the complex where the Frozen Four is going to be there this April. And, you know, for North Dakota, this is pretty devastating from a pairwise standpoint, dropping from 16 to 22. Now that they're running through an NCHC schedule down the road, this is going to be a really, really difficult feat for them to get in position for an at-large bid.
Yeah, you know, and I think what we may have learned this weekend is something we've had the suspicion of the whole season. Maybe North Dakota is just not the typical North Dakota team this year. And it's okay. You can have off years. This might be a year that they missed the NCAA tournament. I know it doesn't bode well for the fans up there. But this is not the best North Dakota team. That said, they had never lost to an Atlantic hockey opponent coming into this game. To lose once is one thing. To lose back-to-back nights is another. All that said, you got to credit Canisius and their goaltending, as you kind of pointed out. Even their defense, 162 shot attempts for North Dakota over the 2 nights, just 2 of them finding the back of the net. It's an impressive weekend for the Griffs. They're obviously heading toward in a very good direction. Of course, you get that adrenaline when you're playing a team like North Dakota. You know exactly the history of the program, all that stuff. Now you got to see if Canisius, and I've seen this, especially in Atlantic hockey and the ECAC the most, teams can go out and put some of the most impressive non-league wins up, and then they go back into their league play and they're back to mediocre. So I've got to see. I'm really interested. I think this is probably one of the better Atlantic hockey teams. Now can they show it once they get into league play?
And, you know, league play is going to be huge. Right now, you can be in 7th place, and next weekend, if you sweep, you're in 2nd place. Everything is that packed tightly. From 7th place to 1st place, only 4 points separating in that conference. And it's that way all around college hockey. It's going to make it fun. You know, you talk about a pennant race in baseball. We've got 6 pennant races going on in college hockey, so it should be exciting. But the other thing I got to worry about, I think, for North Dakota is Canisius got these wins with 14 shots on Friday and 16 shots on Saturday. They really, other than goaltending, they really were clamped down on. It was a stellar goaltending performance for Canisius and maybe not so stellar on the other end.
Yeah, you know, it's never the number of chances, but the number of quality chances. And, you know, I haven't looked at any film or video on the series. So, you know, maybe you're having defensive breakdowns. Maybe you're giving too good of opportunities. Who knows? You know, I don't want to just blame goaltending. I will go the other way. And when I see the numbers on the Canisian side, credit goaltending. But I'm always a little, you know, hesitant to blame goaltending because sometimes it's just the defense is just leaving that goaltender out to dry in very select spots. But when you're playing an opportunistic team, and obviously Canisius was very opportunistic this weekend, finding a way to score the goals they needed to without putting up a ton of shots, you know, sometimes that's just the way it goes.
And Canisius was given credit by North Dakota coach Brad Berry for Dylan McLaughlin and his line. McLaughlin figured in on a couple of assists over the weekend, but he said, yeah, this guy's for real. McLaughlin is certainly a candidate, probably will be the candidate, the finalist from Atlantic Hockey for the Hobie Baker Award. One other thing in that game, Matt Steve for Canisius had a bad injury, a slice to the neck.
Yes.
We're told he's at Buffalo General, and it's not life-threatening as we're recording. So I guess that was a bit of a scary moment at that game.
Yeah, I've seen that a few times in my long tenured career in college hockey, where you have some bad injuries. A skate blade gets in the net, or a skate blade maybe cuts some tendons in a wrist or something like that. And those are really delicate surgeries. Some of them have to be performed quicker than the others. And obviously the ability to get that player to the hospital and get the surgery underway really quickly was probably the most critical part of it all. Great to hear that it'll be a full recovery. But those are scary moments when you see a player on the ice with those types of injuries. One
last gaudy number from that matchup. Saturday night's game, North Dakota outshot Canisius 23-2 in the first period.
It's unbelievable. I mean, those are the types of numbers where you know you're giving a goaltender and probably the defense in front of him for maybe keeping some of those shots to the outside, but you're definitely giving the goaltender a lot of credit.
Jim, let's take a moment to pause for a word from our friends from the NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
Speed and precision, unrelenting power. This trophy is not given, it must be earned. The 2019 NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
With a shot. Morris takes the shot.
Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 and get your tickets today.
Arizona State, they remain on fire, sweeping Boston College this weekend, which brings up two different points. One, what does Arizona State need to do with the 10 games it has left to make it into the NCAA tournament because the only way they're getting in is at large, being an independent team. And the other question, as I saw somebody describe it the other day, Boston College has not won in non-conference play during the entire 115th Congress.
I guess that's a way to put it into perspective if you understand your political science. But it's almost 2.5 years, and it's 25 games, including some of those beanpot games against Hockey East opponents. But it's been way too long for BC, and it gets to a point that it becomes a mental block. We talked about this on last week's show. I think it was the game of the week, but it becomes a mental block. I mean, BC's holding a 1-goal lead in the third period. And, under Jerry York, you got to think about this has been a team that closes out almost all of their games that they can go into the third period with a lead. Instead, they gave up 4 goals. Now, 2 of them were empty netters, but they gave up 4 in the third period. And then the next night you come out and you get shut out. And this is at Gila River, where Arizona State, I think, was 1-11 lifetime coming into that game. It's not been a very friendly venue to the Sun Devils. So you're talking a very delicate team mentally, I think, when it comes to non-conference play. Now, for some reason, come back into Hockey East, and it doesn't seem to be a problem. Obviously, BC won the league championship last year in the regular season. They're right in a place after UMass lost on Friday night. They're in a position to maybe win another one in Hockey East, but it's a strange phenomena. Now, on the other side, we talk about Arizona State. They're 10th in the pairwise right now. They only have 10 games left, and you've got to think some teams out there might have as many as 14, maybe even 16 games left. I'd have to look. I think 14 is the high number on games left for teams. But most of those teams will also play at least 2 playoff games. Maybe they'll play as many as 6 playoff games. So there's a potential that you might have 20 games left on your slate. That's double the number of games that Arizona State has right now. What does that mean for the Sun Devils? That there's a good and a bad to it. The good is if you post a good record in these last 10 games, you're going to solidify your NCAA tournament hopes because you can't lose when other teams out there are losing. So if they can keep themselves around 11, 10, 9 in the pairwise, they're probably going to get an at-large bid, and they'll know that, basically the first week of March. That said, I think that they have to pull together the equivalent of 7 wins over this next 10 games, which will be tough. 8 of those games are on the road. Mm-hmm. I think that if you can basically pull out 14 points, 13 points, so I could see a 5-2-3 record being enough. I could definitely see a 7-3. I think you can kind of rubber stamp them in, but it's like 6-4, 5-5, 5-4-1. Those types of records over this stretch could be enough to keep Arizona State out. They are right now. I think their record is. I'm just trying to pull it up. 12-6-0. No, that's not right. I have the wrong one here. Arizona State right now 16-7-1. So you're talking 7 more wins would put them at 23. That's usually enough. 23 usually does it. But it's at a point that they can't go 500 the rest of the way and expect to make this tournament. And they also have to watch out who they might lose to in this too. As you go down through number 20 Cornell, they visit Lina Rink for a pair next weekend, but then they'll be on the road at Boston University. They go to RIT, they host American International, and they go to Minnesota. Those 4 games against Atlantic hockey teams, they've got to watch out for. If they get swept or lose even like 3 points against either one of those opponents, that could hurt them a bit more in the pairwise based on opponents' rankings for those Atlantic hockey teams. And even Minnesota and BU, who are not having the best of seasons, that could be damaging. So they've got to be careful about that, especially those 4 games they have against Atlantic hockey. Yeah, if you circle the teams that are left, the 4 against Atlantic hockey feel like your must wins. If you take care of business in those 4 games, then you probably need to pick up 3 games, basically split all the rest of your series, and that's Cornell, Boston University, and Minnesota. If you can just earn splits in those, take care of business in Atlantic hockey, you're probably in the NCAA tournament. But as you mentioned, if you sweep BU, you sweep Cornell, you take 2 out of 4 points against Minnesota, but you lose 3 of those 4 games against Atlantic Hockey. You've put up a good number of wins, but you've also lost to teams that will pull you down and drag you right down in the pairwise. And that's where it becomes the most dangerous for Arizona State. You bring up a really good point. It's the opponents they still play. RIT, we know that they've been a pretty good team. We've seen them put forth really good performances out of conference this season. And AIC has been probably one of the scariest teams. I think, when you really look at Atlantic Hockey, you don't want to be fooling around with a team, especially on home ice, that, it can be a real dark horse or maybe a spoiler. So those are the games we're going to have to really keep an eye on, because you got to have four wins in those 4 Atlantic Hockey games.
Meanwhile, Boston College still has a couple of chances to win out of conference with the Beanpot coming up.
They do, and I think it's back-to-back years they finished 4th in the Beanpot. I don't think that's ever happened in the tenure of the tournament before the last 2 seasons. So they're going to have to find a way to win one of those games. Again, it becomes a mental block, but if there's any games that can kind of get you out of that, it's the Beanpot, because that is something just very special to every program. BC will not be going into that thinking about, boy, can we break our out-of-conference streak? They'll be going into it thinking, boy, can we win the Beanpot?
Well, our game of the week this past weekend was Miami at Providence, particularly Saturday night's 3-3 overtime tie, a 4-2 win for Providence on Friday. You covered the Saturday game for USCHO. What are your thoughts on both those teams, Providence and Miami?
I think Providence is a very good hockey team. I mean, really good. They will be a team that will be there at the end. They do a lot of things right. Last night, they had that game pretty much in control, a 2-0 lead. They give up a power play goal. It becomes 3-1. 2-1, but then immediately 15 seconds later they retake the 2-goal lead. They got themselves into some penalty trouble, and the penalties themselves didn't hurt. They gave up that 1 power play goal, but like I said, they struck right after, so maybe that balances out. But it was just the ability to pull some flow out of the game, and at moments that they were playing very well. Miami 7 power play opportunities. Nate Lehman wasn't happy with that. For Miami, I just really like their stick-to-itiveness last night. They go down 3-1 the way that they did 15 seconds after getting back in a game. A lot of teams would just pack it in on the road and say, this is a lost weekend. We didn't play well on Friday, and that was the case from what Rico Blasi said. They didn't play well on Friday night. Saturday night, yeah, we played a lot better, but we still weren't good enough. That's the way you would expect a team to react to that third goal. Instead, no shoulders went down. They kind of kept that positive mentality. You strike with about 5 minutes left, and then you find a way to get an extra attack or goal. Those are the moments that can sometimes redefine a season. And that was kind of what I wrote after the game, that if Miami has a good second half in the NCHC, you can kind of look to that game. It wasn't a win, but as a really good tie. And sometimes those are the moments that can turn things around. That's a very good Providence team that they went into on the road. I thought the crowd from Miami was great. They had a really good environment created for the Redhawks because they had a ton of fans there. But that's a very good tie for them. Providence, it might be a really good tie for them as well, because you kind of kick yourself in the butt and say, boy, we should have had that point. Maybe that refocuses them a little bit. It's easy to get an ego going when you have not an easy win, but a win on Friday night where you dominated a team, and then you seem to dominate a team on Saturday night for parts of the game, and you come out with a tie. So it was a very good hockey game. I will tell you, great college hockey game. Two good teams. I'm really impressed with Providence. Every time I've seen them this year, they've been probably the better team on the ice. And now, ironically, I've seen them twice in person. They've had a loss and a tie, and they've by far been the better team on the ice most of the game. Okay, you're now banned from the press box at Schneider Arena. One last thing to mention on this episode of Weekend Review Podcast. A heartbreaking loss for the U.S. at the World Juniors to Finland, down 2-0. They battle back to tie it at 2 and give up a goal with a minute and a half left. Yeah, and I have, because I was working last night, I still haven't watched the replay in its entirety of that game. I was only really through the second period. I was worried about this game, and the reason is, and we've heard it said in college, you hear it said, oh, it's hard to beat an opponent 3 times, 4 times. In a short tournament like this, I think it's difficult to beat a good opponent twice. Winning the first time in the way the U.S. did on New Year's Eve was a pretty dominant win. Might be one of the worst things that could have happened in the U.S. because sometimes you enter, when you're now playing for the gold medal and you're playing an opponent that, probably feels lucky to be there the way that they had to beat Canada to get into the semifinals, just to get out of the quarterfinals. A dramatic, last second goal kind of off a leg, and then an overtime game winner after you had given up a penalty shot. I mean, there was just some crazy circumstances to get Finland there. But for Finland, I think they played with the house's money. The U.S., they maybe didn't, take the Finns seriously enough. Then they get behind, they find a way to tie it. But then that's the reality of single elimination hockey, or hockey in general. Just a random bounce, from what I can hear, was not exactly a highlight reel goal, more of a squeaker that ended up winning the game. Good for the Finns. The one thing I will bring up from that, and I've seen replays of this, and I saw it on the broadcast, there was an early disallowed goal. I think it was Oliver Wahlstrom had it.
Yes.
For the U.S. And it makes me question. I mentioned something on Twitter about this last night, and I've always questioned the IIHF in the way that they officiate the game. We hear, guys like Steve Piotrowski and Frank Cole have, long talked about in college hockey the desire to increase scoring opportunities, to increase offense, and the rules kind of dictating that. It seemed to me that a goal was disallowed last night, not because a player was in the crease when a goal was scored, but a player had been in the crease a couple of seconds earlier. And that, to me, is crazy. I mean, that almost feels like the old NHL rule almost 20 years ago, where if somebody's skate was touching the crease, you couldn't have a goal. College had that for a while. I remember Maine lost a national title game to Denver back in, I think it was 2004, on a similar play. But you think about the game and how hard it is to score goals, and now you're finding ways to disallow goals because of something that happened a couple of seconds prior to the puck going in the net. It doesn't make any sense to me. The IIHF rules. I'm glad that the U.S. really only has the World Juniors that they worry about in the Olympics when it comes to IIHF. They don't care about the World Championships, and I don't think they should, because the IIHF doesn't really care about the United States. But it just doesn't make sense. I feel for those guys. For that's a disallowed goal. Maybe you're still playing. Maybe it's 3-3. Whatever. Maybe you get that lead and you never look back. You never know. But plays like that kind of get to me when I see them in a championship game. It feels like the referees, in poorly designed rules, deciding a championship instead of the players on the ice.
Plus crews that are not used to working with each other. That's a part of it too. I don't think you'll convince Buffalo Sabres fans that was the rule in the NHL way back when, but but that's the way it goes. We've really kind of hit our end of our time here, Jim, for this episode of Weekend Review Podcast. Tune in for our podcasts all week long, and we'll catch you next time. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.